Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A First Nations leader in Manitoba who has been on leave following a bar fight in Ottawa in December is back on the job. In a post on social media, the Southern Chiefs organization in Manitoba says it has welcomed back its Grand Chief, Jerry Daniels, after what they're calling a, quote, recent health leave. In the statement, the SCO said they were excited to welcome back Jerry Daniels. They also thanked Lake Manitoba Chief Cornell McLean, who stepped in as acting SCO Grand Chief. Last December, Daniels was sent to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries after a bar fight in Ottawa's Byward Market, just hours before the opening of the Assembly of First Nations Winter Gathering. Ottawa police have since closed the investigation into the matter and said no charges would be laid unless new information comes to light. Daniels apologized for that night and said he had a problem with alcohol. The SCO statement did not mention a summit they said would be held to determine Daniels' future as Grand Chief. A Mi'kmaq politician made history today. Jaime Battiste announced he is running for the leadership of the Liberal Party. And if he were to win, he'd become the first Indigenous Prime Minister of Canada. Angel Moore has that story.
Today, I'm grateful to announce that I've submitted my application and all of the requirements to run for the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and to be the first Indigenous person ever to run for the Prime Minister of Canada.
Jaime Battiste beat a deadline on Thursday as he submitted the required 300 registered Liberal signatures along with a $50,000 deposit. With the support of Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq leaders from the Atlantic region, Chief Leroy Denny of the Eskasoni First Nation hosted the event. He says Battiste has the experience to lead the country.
For his background, his education in law, and as a parliamentary secretary, he has the tools, he has everything in his toolbox to make sure that he can also run this country like any other party leaders that are running for the bid, which I respect them all.
Chief Terry Paul of the Membertou First Nation says Battiste can ensure Indigenous rights will be heard at the federal level.
We have certain rights here, and of course, Jaime has the mind of working with the whole country, which is fantastic, and that should be, running for Prime Minister. But my support comes from our need to have our rights recognized by the federal government.
Battiste is from the Eskasoni First Nation, and it's not the first time he's made history. He is the first Mi'kmaq elected to Parliament in 2019, representing a federal riding in Cape Breton. Battiste says if elected Prime Minister, he will work to ensure key legislations will move forward.
And I think that there are fundamental pieces, not just to Indigenous communities, like the ability to have their own watersheds protected, the ability to have child and family services money flow to our communities, that we just can't afford to go to a community in March. We need to give ourselves the ability to move forward on these and get to royal assent, because they're going to be crucial to so many people across this country.
Battiste is still fundraising as he needs to submit $350,000 in 4 installments between January 23rd and February 17th. A new leader will be chosen March 9th. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
A warning now about our next story, as the details here are disturbing. Angry wailing and shouting could be heard in a courtroom in Iqaluit today after a former Catholic priest who sexually abused 7 Inuk children in Nunavut pleaded guilty to 6 of the 8 historical charges. The court heard that 77-year-old Eric Yeager committed the sexual assaults between 1978 and 1982 in Iqaluit, Nunavut, with the victims' ages between 6 and 9 years old, and some as young as 4 years old. During victim impact statements, the victims' families called Yeager a sick monster and that his actions caused generations of irreparable hurt and pain in Igloolik. Prosecutor Emma Bash described each assault in graphic detail, and as a priest, Yeager would offer children candy before sexually assaulting them and told his victims that they would go to hell if they spoke out. Many of the victims also said they or their families will never go to church again. Yeager, who moved to Canada from Belgium in 1977, was an oblate priest and was arrested on a Canada-wide warrant in 2023. Was previously convicted of committing numerous other sexual offenses against children in Baker Lake, Nunavut. Roger Bilodeau was convicted of 2 counts of manslaughter in the 2020 shooting deaths of Jacob Sampson and Maurice Cardinal. On Wednesday, he was denied full parole by the Parole Board of Canada. Bilodeau was handed a 10-year sentence in 2022 for his role in the deaths of the 2 Métis hunters. In March 2020, Bilodeau and his son Anthony pursued Cardinal and Sampson for 7 kilometers in a high-speed chase, incorrectly identifying them as thieves. Anthony shot both men and left them for dead. He was convicted of second-degree murder and manslaughter and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole until 2036. The family of the hunters were pleased with the parole board's decision.
You know, you get this heavy feeling in your stomach. You just feel sick to your stomach because you know that our statements, the words we speak, the pain we feel is not going to be heard. However, today was a little bit different. The parole board members that they had today were compassionate, and they actually heard our words. They felt our pain.
That makes me really happy. It makes me feel like we were heard, even with all the Roger not taking accountability for his actions. And so, yes, I'm happy.
A Grand Chief in BC is apologizing for comments he made about a pipeline project. We'll hear from the Grand Chief, and our Truth in Politics panel will be here to discuss the matter after the break. Stick around. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump wasted no time in confirming his plan to implement a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican trade goods. APTN's Tina House has reaction from British Columbia.
At President Trump's inaugural speech, he confirmed he will tariff foreign countries.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury.
Reaction was swift even before the Trump inauguration.
Our country is under direct threat by the President-elect of the United States. It is a declaration of economic war, in my opinion.
Werner Antweiler is a professor of economics at the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. He explains what these tariffs mean.
It would be a very, very difficult situation for the Canadian economy if these tariffs go ahead, because not only would we see the tariffs in the U.S., but we would also need to respond with retaliatory measures, which also will hurt our Canadian economy. But in that situation, there will be significant pain all across, but not only here in Canada, because tariffs are paid for by the U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses that are importing Canadian intermediate goods.
Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says what President Trump is doing is serious.
These are very, very real threats, and are going to have a devastating impact on our economy and, quite frankly, our way of life. Trump has absolutely no respect for the rule of law or, common decency with respect to the rights and interests of all people. particularly Indigenous peoples.
Professor Antweiler says Trump's plan to launch an external revenue service could hit some serious roadblocks.
Now, if that includes Canada and Mexico, of course, it would be an abrogation of our existing free trade agreement. There's just no other way to put this. It's he's ripping up an agreement he has signed himself, which is raising the question, how good is his word to anything?
Premier Eby says leaders from across Canada have discussed strategies to combat the threat of these tariffs.
The world, these tariffs are proposed not just against Canada, but against countries around the world. We will partner with those countries and work with them to respond and also to deepen our relationships with them. We have trade relationships, strong trade relationships across the Pacific with many different countries, and this is an opportunity for us to deepen and strengthen those relationships and reduce our dependence on the United States.
We have a lot of allies that will be part of this battle. It's going to be epic in proportion, but I think at the end of the day it'll be defining.
Financial forecasters say Canada will lose billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs from the tariffs. President Trump has announced that these tariffs will begin on February the 1st, 2025. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
To pipeline or not to pipeline? That's just one of the questions on the minds of our Truth in Politics panel this week. Jennifer Leywitz of Pascoa Harbor Strategies is here with Winnipeg Free Press columnist Negon Sinclair. But first, we hear from Stuart Phillip, the Grand Chief of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, who earlier in the week said he was reconsidering his stance on the Northern Gateway pipeline.
To the thousands of people that put themselves in harm's way and were on the front lines of that fight. There was enormous representation of elders and knowledge keepers and traditional people involved in that fight. There were young people involved in that fight, and our friends and neighbors took up the call to stand in solidarity with us. And, you know, I apologize for any confusion I may have created through my misstatements and the interpretation of those statements at the press conference at the First Nations Leadership Gathering alongside Premier Eby and other members of the Leadership Council.
Jennifer Negon, excited to see you. Thanks for being with us this week. Jennifer, we'll start with you. The Grand Chief of the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs signaled earlier this week support for the Northern Gateway pipeline, and then yesterday apologized for that. Thoughts on all of that?
I think this is really just showcasing that the conversation around resource development has shifted quite a bit in the last 10 years, especially. I think that there's this really tough line for a lot of people in leadership roles where they're fighting a battle between what their morals are telling them they should be fighting and what society is telling them that they should be doing. And essentially what I mean by that is there are a lot of people out there that carry those morals and those principles when it comes to defending the land and what they've been taught about the importance of the land and sustaining life through the land. But at the same time, there are nations all over the country that are getting involved in resource projects. And at the end of the day, it is creating some wealth opportunities for those nations. But at the same time, I think it's putting other people in leaderships in places where they think that they need to be a part of that too. And that's where that self-determination is so important, where number one, don't make decisions based off of what other people are telling you should be making, even as individuals that belong to nations, but also for our leadership, because at the end of the day, you're not supposed to just make decisions based off of what is good for right now, but what is good for the long term. So that's the only thing I'll leave on when it comes to that is just do what your heart and your teachings tell you should be doing, and maybe not what is going to make you money in the quickest way possible.
Well, Negon, as I mentioned, you know, the UBCIC issued a release yesterday after the story initially hit the media, saying that they still oppose pipeline development. The Grand Chief apologizing for any confusion. Was Grand Chief Stuart Phillips speaking for himself here, maybe?
This was a sort of interesting moment for the country to realize the kind of tensions that Jennifer's speaking about for First Nations politicians. Because yes, you can speak as an individual. Yes, most chiefs have that very tricky situation of having to work under an Indian Act, so you're therefore mired in poverty systemically throughout every interaction you have with the government. So when you have the opportunity to involve yourself in a resource extraction project, even if it goes fundamentally against the principles of who you are and your tradition and your ceremonies, you are interested. You are certainly open to the idea. And so if you say that, though, if you talk about it, you are immediately accountable. And for those of us who have for years talked about some of the real big challenges and problems with resource extraction projects, particularly in relation to our teachings and our ceremonies, what I always say is there's no reason to sing bear songs if there's no bears. And so I can imagine that what happened with Grand Chief Philip is he said that. Said he was open to it because Trump has changed the game for every leader, every political leader on this continent, including First Nations, Inuit, Métis leaders. And immediately his phone probably blew up, not just from constituents, not just from members, it's probably his family, the people who he was on the front lines struggling against RCMP and governments and citizens of BC and so on. So the reality is that this was sort of a masterclass of understanding what First Nations politicians have to go through and that really tricky balance that Jen was talking about.
Jen, this has opened up a larger discussion on this type of stuff, though. Do you think we might hear more about previously shelved energy projects being resurrected?
I think so. I think there's going to be a large conversation when it comes to resource development, especially with the potential change in government. You know, I know there's a lot of people that are vying for Mark Carney to potentially be our next prime minister, but the reality is there's a very good chance that it's Pierre Poilievre. And we kind of left that conversation off with Stephen Harper and Idle No More and the Jobs and Growth Act and essentially trying to ram through decisions without consultation. And unfortunately, we've talked a lot about reconciliation over the last 9 years, but I truly feel like we have not advanced consultation to where it needs to go. And that is an issue even for me personally, where I heavily believe in self-determination and allowing nations and even as individuals to prosper in ways that make sense for us because we're already existing in societies that are hard to exist in. But at the same time, that consultation piece is so important because there are people out there that are carrying those teachings so close to them. And we can't be allowing government to just make those decisions for us. And the last piece of that is I think that these companies are finding ways to make it more lucrative for First Nations, and they're almost preying on them in a way where they're coming back and saying, listen, there's a national loan guarantee program. Let's work together on this. You don't even have to put up any money. But if that project fails, it's the nation that has to bear the weight of that. And I feel like these resource companies are finding ways through vulnerable nations, and they're almost using them as their fall guy should something go wrong.
Nigan, pipelines are difficult to get built in Canada and take years. I mean, the Northwest, Trump would be out of office probably by the time it gets built. Do you think that there might be more Indigenous support, though, for projects in light of the current political environment?
Undoubtedly. You're already seeing, like, for example, a long-resisted project in Northern Ontario with the Ring of Fire. You're seeing First Nations getting on board saying, okay, well, we've got to deal with the reality that we have to make a living. We have to make some kind of economy out of this, even in the most direst of circumstances, which really brings you to our resource extraction projects, pipelines, even hydro lines through territories. Are these really a choice? Because what's happened is that First Nations particularly have been driven into poverty where they really don't have a choice. And then a very lucrative project with people who are obsessed with profit, like the corporations that Jen's talking about. And so is it really a choice? Is it really a choice for First Nations to be in that particular scenario? And is it an element of self-determination when you really have a suicide epidemic in your community? You have boil water advisories, you have the challenge of trying just to have infrastructure in your community, and then boom, here comes a corporation handing out a few dollars, maybe a few jobs. So is it really self-determination? That's really the big question. And consultation should be the centerpiece, and that's what government's role should be, is treating First Nations, Inuit, Métis governments fairly in relation to these opportunities. Now, just to your last question there, which is, will there be more opportunity? Yes, absolutely. We see Danielle Smith breaking with Alberta Premier, breaking with all the other premiers, going herself directly to Donald Trump because she is claiming that other premiers have landlocked her. And you can't ignore that she's probably also talking about First Nations at the same time. So there will be increasing pressure on governments to be able to open up these projects.
Jennifer Negon, it's great to chat with you, and we're going to continue the conversation, of course, over on the Truth in Politics podcast, but we'll leave it there for today here on the show.
Yeah, good.
Time for one last break, but stay with us. There's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Ellis Cowley sent in this extreme close-up. Thanks, Ellis. Stay safe out there when photographing wildlife. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at your Friday weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, -4 with snow in Halifax, 7 below in Fredericton. -12 and flurries in Kuujjuaq, 13 below in Nain. -9 in Montreal, -15 in Val-d'Or. Cloudy and 9 below in Sault Ste. Marie, -13 in North Bay. Cloudy and 10 below in Thunder Bay, flurries and -13 in Sioux Lookout. -7 with snow in God's Lake, 5 below with snow in Norway House. -2 in flurries in Winnipeg, Gimli, and Brandon. -7 with snow in Regina, sunny, and -3 in Saskatoon. 3 below in La Ronge and Meadow Lake. In northern Alberta, snow and -2 in High Level, +1 with snow in Fort McMurray. -1 in Edmonton and Lethbridge, 2 below in Calgary. +4 and sunny skies in Vancouver, 6 and sunny in Tofino. -3 in Prince George, 1 below in Smithers. +1 and snow in Old Crow, sunny and -6 in Whitehorse. -10 with flurries in Yellowknife, 4 below in Norman Wells. -14 in Sax Harbor, flurries and 5 below in Pawlatuck. -31 with snow in Chesterfield, 30 below and snow in Baker Lake. -34 in Resolute, 32 below in Joe Haven. Warmer in Whitehorse than here. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Fraser Needham's standing by with a look at tonight's Nation to Nation.
Coming up after the news, the federal government and 15 Northern Ontario First Nations released a roadmap on what should be done on development of an area known as the Ring of Fire. Nesmantega First Nation Chief Chris Monias is here to give us his thoughts. Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States this week. Jordan Bennett-Biguet of ICT News joins us to talk about what Native Americans think. And Doug Cuthand is a longtime columnist with the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix. He's here to talk about Justin Trudeau's legacy when it comes to Indigenous people in Western Canada. All this in a matter of minutes on Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Fraser. Stacked show as always. Looking forward to that. You can catch Nation to Nation right here in less than 2 minutes' time. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News tonight. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch. We'll see you back here tomorrow.